Oh, wow. Okay. This is actually the second time I'm going to attempt to film this video, so let's just cross our fingers and hope that I won't need a third try this time. Well, hello there, welcome back. Today I'm here to talk to you about the GRISHA trilogy. As you probably noticed by reading the title of this video, it's 2020 and I just now finished reading the GRISHA trilogy for the first time ever. So I do believe congratulations are in order. I remember being quite interested in reading these books back when they were first published because they were advertised as a Russian-inspired fantasy, and I was just starting to learn Russian back then, and I was really interested in the Russian culture and all that, which I still am to this day. But then as time went on, I just never actually picked them up. First because I couldn't afford them, but then eventually I just felt that maybe I had outgrown it. I just always expect any YA book that was published before 2015 to either be very problematic or just very bad, which is unfair, I'm aware of that, but the shit that I read back when I was a teenager, yeah, since I finally read the books now, I wanted to talk to you about them. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have a first part of this video where it's gonna be spoiler free, and I'm gonna go over the world and the magic system and the characters and the plot of the first book. And then we're gonna get to the second part of the video that's gonna be filled with spoilers, because there are a couple of things that I wanted to discuss that happen in the third book, or that are just spoilery. So the Grisha trilogy was written by Leigh Bardugo and it is part of the Grishaverse. The books are Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and Ruin and Rising. So first I'm going to talk a bit about the world in which this trilogy takes place, just because I find it a bit easier to, go over the plot after clearing the spell of the road and the magic system and all that. The world in which this takes place is called Ravka, and it is a Russian-inspired country, we'll get to that later, that is divided by the Unsea, also known as the Shadowfold, which is this stretch of land that is covered in darkness and filled with monsters and splits the country into two territories. You have to actually cross the Unsea in order to get to West Ravka, which is the other part of the country, where you get the supplies and things like that. Ravka has actually been at war with neighboring countries for a long time, and it has two armies to defend itself. The first army is basically like a regular army with ordinary people, and the second army is made up of Grisha. The Grisha are the people who use a small science. There's actually a quite short quote in the book that explains this very well, so I'm just gonna read it to you. Everything in the world could be broken down into the same small parts. What looked like magic was really the Grisha manipulating matter at its most fundamental levels. Marie didn't make fire. She summoned combustible elements in the air around us, and she still needed a flint to make the spark that would burn that fuel. Grisha steel wasn't endowed with magic, but by the skill of fabricators, who did not need heat or crude tools to manipulate metal. The grounding principle of the small science was like calls to like. Basically, they have superpowers. They are divided into three categories depending on what affinities they have. So you have the corporalki, the materialki, and the eterialki. The materialki are either alchemists, or they can build things and fabricate things with their own hands. The corporalki can manipulate the body, either to heal or to hurt and kill, while that rhymed. The eterialki are the order of the summoners, and they can summon and control some of the elements, not all of them. They can be either summoners of air or water or fire. At least for the most part, that's what they are, because the commander of the second army is actually a Darkling, which is a type of summoner that only shows up every few generations and is able to summon and control darkness. I really like this magic system because it's at least a tiny little bit grounded in science. I mean, it's a very little bit, but still. And I like the fact that in this world, it is seen as a science rather than a mystical thing. And I also appreciate how all of the powers have their own limitations. In the first book, Shadow and Bone, we follow 16-year-old Alina Starkov, who is a soldier in the First Army who's about to go on her first mission across the Shadow Fold. These missions are quite common, but they're also quite dangerous. You know, most people usually die, and so Alina is very worried. Alina grew up with her best friend in an orphanage, and she actually has a huge crush on him. And he is a tracker in the First Army, and his name is Mal. Mal goes on the same mission as Alina, and he is actually attacked inside the Unsea by one of the monsters, and that ends up causing Alina to awaken her dormant Grisha powers, a power that she didn't even know she had and that she had been suppressing up until that point. But there's a catch, of course. Alina's power is different. She's a summoner, yes, but not of the elements and not even of darkness. She is a sun summoner, so she can summon and control the light, and she might be Ravka's best hope of getting rid of the Shadow Fold. The book follows Alina's journey as she is taken to the palace to be trained with the other Grisha, learns how to use her powers, and navigates her feelings and her relationships with both the Darkling and Mal. Let's talk about the characters in this trilogy. I really like them. I found most of them to be multifaceted and realistic, even when being realistic meant acting stupid or being annoying. And on that note, let's talk about our main character. I actually quite like Alina. I mean, yeah, she's very insecure and she spends a lot of time thinking about boys and she makes some dumb mistakes, but I mean, hey, she's 16 years old. She starts the books being very naive, which at first I thought was very unrealistic, you know, considering she was brought up in a world at war, but upon further inspection, I think it kind of makes sense. Despite Ravka being a shithole and her being an orphan, we have to remember that her life at the orphanage was relatively sheltered. Oh, but what about her being in the army? How is she still naive if she's a soldier? I actually think her being a soldier says more about the state of Ravka than it does about her. Because even though Alina is physically weak, you know, partially due to suppressing her power at this time, and even though she is not particularly skilled at physical combat, she is still useful to the war effort. And we actually see that with the fact that she is a cartographer, you know, a position where she wouldn't typically have to see any combat at all. The reason she's even sent along a mission across the Shadow Fold is so that she would be able to manage to study the terrain and, you know, manage to create a map of the Shadow Fold. And she did have physical training, you know, combat training, so she probably knows the basics of the basics, but still she is a very weak person. Anyway, I really like Alina's journey as a character. She starts off as this very naive and gullible and easily manipulated girl, and as the books go on, she actually grows quite a lot and she learns how to play this Game of Thrones. I'm sorry, but yeah, this game. And she understands it better and she becomes a better player. But also she learns how to use her powers better and she becomes very cunning and just ambitious and powerful. Alina's power is essentially an extension of herself, and I particularly liked seeing her relationship with it and how it evolved throughout the books, and also the dichotomy of it, really. She loves the connection that she has with the light, and she falls in love with her power, and she longs to use it, and she's always trying to learn how to be better at using it. On the other hand, she has a hard time coming to terms with the fact that she is the one to wield this power. You know, she, an ordinary girl from an ordinary family with an ordinary life, how is she the one to possess this power? And as she becomes more ambitious, it gets harder for her to balance her hunger for power and her morals. And there's, of course, the responsibility that comes with that power. You know, it's hard for her to be under the pressure of being her country's last hope, while also being under the scrutiny of the court and the other Grisha. Her relationships with the other Grisha were another thing that I really appreciated, because all of them were different. You know, there were people who wanted the honor of being paired up with her and being her friends, and there were people who were extremely jealous of her, you know, for the position that she now had with the Darkling. And you know, there were lots of different types of relationships and reactions to her power and who she was. And that was something else that I really appreciated and that I thought was quite interesting, you know, that Alina's insecurities and her loneliness didn't just magically disappear just because she was powerful or because she was special. You know, she had this special power that no one else had. And she kept looking for somewhere to belong throughout the series, you know. Despite her being a part of many different groups throughout the series, she, you know, kept looking for a place to belong to the last book. Now to our 3 love interests. Yes, we have 3 of those. I really like the 3 of them. I think they are all pretty well developed characters. I do find Mal to be the most boring one out of the bunch. He is not a bad character, don't get me wrong, and I actually really liked seeing how he reacted to the changes in Alina and how the relationship between the 2 of them changed and evolved throughout the series. Although I don't like him, I do think he's a good character. That being said, I do find him significantly less interesting than the other 2 guys. The Darkling, however, more than makes up for it. He is such a compelling character. He does awful things, but he has these twisted justifications and this twisted logic for them. And he genuinely believes that he's doing the best for his country and for the Grisha. I adore his relationship with Alina. I think it's super intriguing, and I love how they play off each other and how they have this fascination with each other and how they are the only ones who can understand what the other feels, you know, in regards to being unique and also the loneliness that comes from being unique. And I really loved his story, you know, his background when we finally got to know it, because I thought it added another layer to him as a character. I just love him so much. I can't talk much about Nikolai because he first shows up in book 2, but rest assured he was a delight. You know, he's charming, he's cocky, he's flirty, and underneath the carefully constructed surface, he is also troubled. And I really liked that, similarly to the Darkling, he is willing to do anything for Ravka. So, you know, you can kind of trace a parallel between the 2 in this sense. There are many other amazing characters, you know, secondary characters who develop beautifully throughout the series, but I can't really talk about them because that would be major spoilers. But, you know, my 3 favorites are Zoya, Bagra, and Xenia. The writing is fine. It's very straightforward. It's not overly lyrical or anything like that. Each of the books have both a prologue and an epilogue that is written in 3rd person, while the rest of the book is written in 1st person from Alina's point of view. And I don't really like that. I thought it was a bit jarring, you know, to jump from the 3rd person to the 1st person. And I think the fact that it only happened twice, you know, once in the prologue and once in the epilogue, just made it feel a bit detached from the rest of the books. I think if you're going to use different narrators, especially if it's going to be like one 1st person and one 3rd person, I think it needs to be more interwoven in the books, you know. Is that a word? Interwoven? I think it needs to happen throughout the book. I guess I just don't really understand the point, you know, of the prologues and epilogues being 3rd person. They are a bit more poetic than the rest of the book. But yeah, I personally didn't really like them. I did get annoyed at the amount of times Alina talked about how mousy and bland and skinny she was, and her mousy brown hair and her brown eyes and her skinny frame and her pale skin, and oh my god, she's so bland. Like, we get it, you have brown hair and brown eyes and you think you're the plainest girl ever. I mean, I appreciate the fact that she's insecure, you know, that's an interesting character trait, but I mean, you don't need to punch me in the face with it 1,000 times, you know, I get it. It's fine. Other than that, I thought the writing was okay, you know, it was good, but nothing special, really. That being said, there is one thing in the writing of this book that really pisses me off, and that is the Russian. Slight angle change, the sun was getting in my face, and it was just bad, so this is it now. Thank you. The Russian is one of my biggest gripes of this trilogy, so allow me to talk a little about that. But before we get into it, I would just like to clarify a few things. I am not Russian, and I don't speak Russian fluently, but I've been studying the language in my spare time on and off for the last 7 or 8 years. And even though my knowledge is extremely basic, this is something that is very dear to me. Okay, first of all, I think calling the GRISHA trilogy Russian-inspired is a stretch. It feels like it is at most inspired by a Russian version of one of those aesthetic mood boards on Pinterest, like balalaikas, alcohol, a tsar, furry hats, boom, Russia. That's not how it works. Other than the Russian language and the aforementioned stereotypes, the only other parallels I could personally trace were the apparat and Rasputin, and also the inspiration that seemed to be drawn from the Russian Orthodox Church, which, by the way, I heard from people of that religion that it was quite offensive. So you do with that information what you will. On the topic of the Russian language, it was also not very good. When I tell you that reading the Russian in these books was a wild ride, I mean it. Sometimes Leigh Bardugo takes a Russian word and just decides it means something different now, and sometimes she adds a Russian suffix to a non-Russian word, and other times she adds a non-Russian suffix to a Russian word, and that is absolutely no pattern, you know, there's no consistency whatsoever. Take, for example, the issue of gender inflection. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I do understand and I am fully aware of the fact that gender is not a binary. However, unlike English, nouns and adjectives and, you know, many other things that I don't know the English names of are gendered in Russian. That's just how the language works. Many languages are like that, including my native language, which is Portuguese, you know, and it's an ongoing struggle to even try to imagine what a more inclusive and gender-neutral version of the language would look like. However, I can assure you that just disregarding gender inflection and using the genders interchangeably is not it. There was an interview where Leigh Bardugo addressed this whole situation, and she said something along the lines of the choice of not strictly gendering surnames was a deliberate one. That's not what you're doing, though. This is not strictly gendering surnames. You are gendering it. The gender is there. You're just using it wrong. Take, for example, the fact that we have a female main character named Alina Starkov, when ov is a male suffix. You know, the proper way would be Alina Starkova, ova, is the female suffix, and similarly we have a male character named Ilya Morozova. Ilya, despite, you know, sounding feminine to Western audiences, is actually a man's name, and so the proper way would be Ilya Morozov, ov, male suffix, right? And I know what you're thinking, so maybe she just, you know, gender swapped. She put the female surnames for the guys and the male surnames for the girls. Everything works in the binary inside this specific book series. Okay, that's why I'm addressing it as a binary right now. But anyway, but that's not it either, because Miles' last name is written properly, you know, with an actual male suffix. So, like, see, that's what I mean when I say that there's no consistency, there is absolutely no pattern, it's chaos, you know. She just, oh my god, I get so fucking frustrated with this, like, and it doesn't only happen with the surnames either. Like, for example, when referring to the royals, they say Moi Tsar for the king and Moya Tsaritsa for the queen, and which is accurate, you know, she did that one right, but when characters start referring to Alina by the Darkling's title, which is Moi Sovereni, they just use it like that, Moi Sovereni, rather than Maya Soverena? Well, not that it actually matters, because Sovereni isn't even an actual Russian word. She just took an English word and added a Russian suffix, because apparently the actual Russian word didn't fit Leigh Bardugo's aesthetic. Other funny/weird things include, but are not limited to, Grisha being the Russian equivalent of Greg. So you have a magical army named the Greg. There's a character named Privyet, which is Russian for hello. There's another character that's named Anakuya, which looks remarkably similar to the transliteration of Anahuya, which means something along the lines of why the fuck. And characters get drunk on kvass, which is a non-alcoholic beverage that actually exists in our world. That last one is one of my personal favorites too, because Leigh Bardugo did not have any problem including the names of other alcoholic beverages such as whiskey, brandy, champagne, but she drew the line at vodka. And before you say, oh, but it's not Russia, it's Ravka, you know, the characters are not speaking Russian, they're speaking Ravkan. Here's the thing, Leigh Bardugo sold these books saying they were Russian-inspired fantasies, okay? And she included actual Russian words, you know, without altering anything in it. So we are led to think that the Ravkan the characters are speaking is actually Russian. You know, she made a point of including Russian words. If you say these characters are speaking Ravkan and then you write them speaking Russian, what is implied is that Ravkan is the equivalent of Russian in a word. If Leigh Bardugo did not want that to be the case, she could have created a fictional language, you know, which is a very hard thing to do, by the way. I'm not diminishing that in any way, but like, if you are going to use an actual language that exists in our world, you have to use it properly. And in the instances where in a fantasy novel or a sci-fi novel you kind of give another meaning to a specific word, the thing is you kind of keep the essence of what that word means. You know, you wouldn't take the word water and say that now it means dirt. It makes no sense. And the thing that makes me angrier about this whole, you know, situation is that it comes across as if she put absolutely no thought at all into the construction of the Ravkan language, other than, does this sound nice? Leigh Bardugo has addressed this a few times already. Once to say that all of her choices other than Anakuya were deliberate, and then another time to say that a choice being deliberate didn't make it good or right. She then acknowledged that her choices were made from a place of insularity and a certain type of privilege, and also said that she understood how, you know, what she decided to do was offensive and insensitive to an entire culture, and she basically vowed to do better from then on. But the thing that I have a problem with in regards to that, you know, the thing that I keep thinking about is, then why is it that in subsequent reprints of the book nothing was corrected? You know, I do understand not changing Grisha because, you know, at that point it was already known as the Grisha Trilogy, you know, so I do understand that, you know, from a capitalist standpoint. But all of the other things, like, most people wouldn't even notice, you know. You could just correct all of the other things super easily and not have this problem anymore. I don't know if this is up to Leigh Bardugo or if this is entirely up to the publisher, but, you know, regardless of whose decision it is, correct the damn mistakes. Come on! And it also doesn't help that when talking about the research that she did on Russia, Bardugo only mentioned books written by Westerners. Yikes. In the end, I mostly enjoyed this trilogy. You know, I had a lot of fun. I actually really loved all these characters. I just wish that, you know, things were written properly. I don't think that's a lot to ask. As for my ratings, I gave the first book, Shadow and Bone, a 3 out of 5 stars. The second book, Siege and Storm, I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. And finally, the third book, Ruin and Rising, I gave either a 3.5 or a 4 out of 5 stars. I'm still debating. Okay, so that's it for the spoiler-free section of the video. If you haven't read the Grisha trilogy and you know you care about spoilers and all that, then this is when you click off. Thank you so much for watching. From this point on, spoiler warning. Okay, so there are 2 specific things that I want to talk about, you know, that are a bit more spoilery. The first thing is why I hate Mal and Alina as the endgame ship. Before Alina found out about her powers, when she and Mal both were ordinary, he had a fairly good life. Like, they both relied on each other, but she was the one who was dependent on him. He was well regarded as a soldier and as a tracker. He had many friends and he got all the girls he wanted, while Alina was miserable. She wasn't particularly good at anything. She didn't have a purpose. She didn't have friends other than Mal. She had the weight of suppressing her powers for all those years. She was miserable. Mal was quite literally the only thing she had, and she depended heavily on him, which is not healthy, you know, for either of them. That's not good. Although Mal said later in the series that he had been in love with Alina for a long time, it was quite clear that he was willing, you know, to build a life with another woman. I mean, he's been with plenty of girls, okay, which would not be a problem had it not been for the fact that the moment Alina starts maybe having feelings for another guy, he feels entitled to being mad with her. I mean, he had decided to not ruin their friendship and to go on with his romantic and sexual life, and he did so without thinking twice. Then Alina discovers her Grisha abilities and she gets healthier, and you know, she gets to know this part of herself that she didn't know before, and she falls in love with her power, and obviously that brings some changes. Mal gets pissed at her for being different now, even though she was fucking miserable before, and he gets butthurt because she's attracted to the Darkling and she might have feelings for him. Like, it was all fine and dandy, you know, when he was the one getting to have sex and be intimate with Zoya and all the other girls, you know. When she decided to do it, then it's a problem, because now he wants her and he's willing to be with her now, so of course she has to drop everything and take him, right? He doesn't really like her powers and he shames her for her ambition. And like, I get it, you know, your childhood best friend changed, you know, quite a lot. I do understand being taken aback by that and being angry at first. I understand that. In book 2, however, the tables kind of turn, because now Alina is everything the Mal has. He lost everything he used to have in his ordinary life, and she has gotten a lot more. He needs and demands a lot more from her, and she doesn't really have the time or the ability to be there for him like he needs her to. She expects him to be there for her because he loves her, and she really likes the sense of security and belonging that she gets when she's with him. But there are times where Mal spends days away, you know, at hunts and all the events like that, and she actually feels relieved because she won't have to be worrying constantly about being with him all the time. On top of that, he hates life in court, and so he really starts resenting her powers, because in his eyes, this is what is keeping her from him, you know. This is what put her in this higher up position, and this is what makes her, you know, makes her time so sparse, you know, and all that. So I do understand where he's coming from. And just to be clear, I think both the ways the relationship between the two of them romantically has happened up until this point, you know, both the way it happened in book 2 and in book 1, are unhealthy. You know, these two ways are unhealthy for both of them for different reasons. Okay, so just putting this out there. And I really like that development, because sometimes in life you love a person but it gets to a point where it just doesn't work anymore and you have to go your separate ways, and that's fine. And this, along with a couple breaking up and going back to being friends, are both things that I personally haven't encountered in YA before. So I was very excited with the prospect of reading about this in these books. I liked how they were left at the end of book 2. You know, they broke up, they were no longer a couple, but they still deeply cared about each other, and they were still kind of learning to navigate this new space, you know, this new relationship. I would have loved them both going back to being friends, because I liked their history together, I liked their friendship, and I think they are both very good characters. So, you know, I think it would be much more interesting for them to go back to being friends than, you know, what actually ended up happening. I have no problem with Mal feeling the things that he feels, thinking the things that he thinks, and doing the things that he does, because they make sense narratively speaking. It's like I said before, you know, your childhood best friend, the person you grew up with, your ride or die, suddenly is very different, and, you know, it's very distant from you. Obviously you're going to be confused and angry and you're going to resent them, but eventually you will learn how to navigate this better, and, you know, to understand the situation more objectively, and, you know, just be better for each other. But him growing out of that mentality in book 3 was a full 180. It came out of nowhere. There was no build-up, there was no progression. It just was. He finished book 2 in one way and began book 3 in another. What happened? And I also have no problem with Alina changing. In fact, I would say it was my favorite part of this series. And yes, both of them made mistakes and both of them were very selfish, but I really liked seeing that because it makes sense. You know, they are young, they are growing up with all of these things on their plates, and it just makes sense, you know. I would just have preferred the outcome being different. I also really like the theme of growing up and letting go of things that you wanted before because they no longer suit you. In the end, I just think this was a huge missed opportunity, and I particularly hate how it is implied from the beginning that for the two of them to be a couple, for there to even be a possibility, Alina couldn't have her powers. Her power that is an intrinsic part of herself, her power that is an extension of her, that power, she couldn't have it. She had to be ordinary for them to be together. And remember how fucking miserable she was before she found out, she discovered her powers. Remember that. And that brings me to the last point, which is, why do I hate this ending so much? Well, the main reason is that Alina loses her powers. I do understand the attempted message, and I do understand the connection to things that were said earlier in the trilogy, but I do hate the implication that 1, being ambitious is wrong. 2, that Alina's ambition is somehow equivalent to that of the Darklings and of Morozova. And 3, that Alina is being punished for being ambitious and powerful. Can we please stop punishing female characters for being ambitious? Can we? That would be great. There's an interview with Leigh Bardugo in this edition of Ruin and Rising, where when she was asked if she knew that Alina would lose her powers all along, this is what she answered. Early in the trilogy, I present the question, what is infinite? The universe and the greed of men. It's something Bagra warns Alina about repeatedly. When you mess with Mirzost, the results are never quite what you anticipated. The rules don't apply differently to Alina just because she's the hero of the story, or because her cause seems just. Okay, fair enough. My personal understanding was that this quote served to explain why a Grisha could only have one amplifier. And yeah, Bagra does say this quote to Alina in other contexts a few times, but Bagra has been wrong before. And even then, why would this quote imply that the person would be powerless after getting the amplifiers together? Why could they just not go back to the amount of power that they had prior to the amplifiers? What? Okay, also we deconstruct a lot of the ideas that the Grisha had throughout the trilogy, so it just goes to show that nothing in Grisha text is set in stone. Additionally, there's this quote by the Darkling that I really like, and I'm gonna read it to you now. When a fire burns, it uses up the wood. It devours it, leaving only ash. Grisha power doesn't work that way. Using our power makes us stronger. It feeds us instead of consuming us. Most Grisha live long lives. The length of a Grisha's life is proportional to his or her power. The greater the power, the longer the life. And when that power is amplified, ... I also find it incredibly amusing that Leigh Bardugo says she can't bend the rules for Alina just because she's the main character, but she has no trouble bending the rules to bring Mal back to life. I mean, make it make sense. The reason Morozova's daughter was brought back to life was because he actively used Mirzost to bring her back to life. Alina didn't use Mirzost to bring Mal back to life, he just came back. And the explanation that was given was this half-assed, out of left field paragraph of Alina's inner monologue that basically said he had two lives all along, his ordinary human life and his amplifier life. Something that was never said before, mind you. Okay, so yeah, when she killed him, she actually only killed his amplifier life, and now he's in his ordinary human being life because Horcruxes. Wait, no, that's the wrong franchise. I actually quite like the idea of Mal being the third amplifier because it changes the entire perspective around the relationship, you know, because all along there was this supernatural force that was at play and that basically pulled each of them towards the other, you know. And Alina actually asks Mal about this, you know, she asks him if he thinks that their relationship is real at all, you know, considering that there is this pull that keeps them together at all times. And Mal answers something along the lines of, maybe it was the supernatural thing at first, but whatever came after, we built it ourselves, you know, and that is it. Completely dismissed it with this line. None of them ever think about it again. None of them ever bring it up again. And we are just supposed to accept that. And like, I'm sorry, but how do you know that you actually built this when this whole entire time you have been under the influence of this mystical thing? How do you know what was you and what wasn't? You don't. You can't. You can't tell it apart. It's like whatever you built with each other, you only built and you only felt like building because this thing was pulling you two together. I don't get it. But yeah, anyway, I really like the idea of it because of the changing perspective that it brings, but also because it is pretty much the physical incarnation of what I mentioned before, of having to let go of things when you grow up. Mal's sacrifice would be not only an extremely earned emotional moment, but also the perfect culmination for what came before. Him dedicating his life to Alina and to being her weapon and to protecting her, and them letting go even though they still deeply care for each other, and they are connected forever. This would be the physical incarnation of them being connected forever. It would still be a heartbreaking ending. Alina would still have to sacrifice and lose something, and we would understand the price of the power and the weight of the power. The way it actually happened just ended up cheapening his sacrifice, and It's a very cheap tactic to get the reader to feel the emotional response to a character's death without having to actually commit to killing the character. I hate this trope so fucking much, it's not even funny. Also, they get married, adopt a child, and start an orphanage while they are still teenagers. Yeah, no, that's a no for me. Nah. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you feel like it. And as always, I'll see you around.